Welcome, dreamy soul. Tonight, I'll be your narrator, here to gently guide you toward calm and restful sleep. Before we start, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more relaxing bedtime stories. Share in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is right now. And if there's a story you'd like me to tell next, I'd love to hear your suggestion. Now, let's begin. I was 16 when my mom died. It was sudden, a car accident that left our family shattered. For months, it was just me and my dad, lost in our grief. Then, about a year later, my dad met Martha. She was a whirlwind of energy and kindness. She had bright eyes, a warm smile, and always brought freshly baked cookies to our house. She worked as a freelance event planner, so she seemed to have endless energy. She made my dad laugh again, and for a while, I thought she was a blessing. I never thought the woman who promised to mend our broken family would be the one to tear it apart, piece by piece, until nothing recognizable remained. Dad and Martha married quickly, just 6 months after they met. Martha moved into our house, bringing with her a sense of order I hadn't known since my mom passed. Our home, which had grown quiet and dusty, now sparkled. Every surface was clean, every pillow plumped. Martha was a wonderful cook. She made delicious dinners, packed my lunches, and even helped me with my homework. She was almost too perfect. She seemed to know what I needed before I even asked. She bought me new clothes, made sure I always had fresh flowers in my room, and encouraged me to spend time with my friends. At first, I was so grateful. It felt like she was trying to replace the emptiness my mom left, and succeeding. But there were small things. The house was too clean. It felt sterile, like a display home. Nothing was ever out of place. And Martha always wore gloves, even indoors, saying she had a mild allergy to common cleaning products. I just shrugged it off as one of her quirks, but soon, the subtle oddness grew into something unsettling. Martha's kindness started to feel like control. She'd ask about my friends, not in a friendly way, but asking specific details, their parents' names, where they lived. If I mentioned a new friend, she'd already know things about them the next day. She started setting strict schedules for me. What time I woke up, what time I ate, when I studied. If I wanted to go out, she'd ask endless questions, making me feel guilty for leaving the house. My dad, blinded by his own happiness, just said she was being protective, trying to give me structure. He didn't see the way her eyes followed me, or the way her smile never quite reached them. One day, I found my old photo album, full of pictures of my mom. All the pictures of my mom were defaced. Her eyes were scratched out with a pen, her face scribbled over. I confronted Martha. She looked shocked, denying everything. "Oh, Sarah, how terrible." It must have been an old pen mark or a trick of the light, but her hands were shaking and her eyes darted away from mine. My instincts were screaming that something was wrong. This wasn't normal. The house, once sparkling, now felt like a cage. The control tightened. She started checking my phone, going through my text messages when I was in the shower. I'd catch her listening in on my phone calls, pretending to be busy nearby. I tried to talk to my dad, but he just told me I was being a difficult teenager, adjusting to a new family dynamic. He refused to see it. I felt completely alone. One afternoon, I was searching for a book in the living room, and I noticed the door to the small study Martha used was slightly open. Usually, it was locked, My heart thumped. She was out grocery shopping. A terrible curiosity pulled me towards the door. I pushed it open slowly. The room was dark, but it wasn't a study. There was no desk, no computer. Instead, there were shelves filled with old photo albums and binders. I pulled one out. It was filled with pictures of my mom. Hundreds of them. Not just family photos, but candid shots, pictures taken from far away, pictures of her going to work, picking me up from school. And next to them, meticulously organized, were binders filled with detailed notes. My mom's daily routine, her favorite foods, her habits, her friends, even her deepest fears, all written down in neat handwriting. Martha's handwriting. My stomach churned. Then I saw it. In the corner, a large closet. I opened it. Inside, hanging perfectly, were rows of clothes. All of them identical to my mom's clothes. Not just similar, but the exact same outfits, right down to the accessories. And then I saw more. Clothes identical to mine. My favorite dress, my worn-out jeans, my school uniform. My breath caught in my throat. On a stand in the center of the closet, a mannequin stood. It was dressed in my mom's favorite sweater, with a wig of my mom's hair. I stared at its faceless head, cold dread gripping me. Suddenly, I heard the front door open. Martha was back. I froze. I heard her footsteps approaching the study. I tried to hide, but there was nowhere to go. She walked in, her eyes falling on me, then on the binders, then on the mannequin. Her perfectly sweet smile stretched wider, becoming grotesque, unnatural. Her eyes glowed with a strange, dark triumph. "Oh, Sarah," she whispered, her voice like ice. "You found my special collection. I worked so hard to become your mother, and now it's time for me to become you." She lunged, pure terror, cold and absolute, ripped through me. I screamed, pushed past her and ran. I ran out of the house, out into the street, not stopping until I reached my best friend's house. I told her everything, sobbing, shaking. When my dad arrived later, Martha was calm, composed. She denied everything, said I was having a breakdown, making things up. Dad, bless his heart, believed her. He sent her away for stress leave, but never really understood what happened. I know she's still out there, possibly looking for her next family to become. The horror followed me home, and I learned that sometimes the most dangerous people are the ones who seem too good to be true, wearing a borrowed face. My name is Jake Miller. I was 22, fresh out of college, living at home to save money while I looked for a job. My mom, after years of being single, found happiness again with Gary. He was a quiet man, a mechanic at the local garage with big, strong hands, always stained with grease. He didn't talk much, but he was kind to my mom, always making sure she was taken care of. He had a small workshop, a garage out back of our house, where he spent most of his free time. He seemed harmless enough, a simple man with a simple life. He was good with his hands, fixing things around the house without asking. He never asked for anything in return. I never thought the quiet mechanic, who fixed everything, would be the one to break our reality piece by agonizing piece. When Gary moved in, he brought his tools and equipment, setting up his workshop in the old detached garage behind our house. It was a good arrangement. He was respectful, always polite, and kept to himself. The garage door was usually kept locked, and he spent hours in there, tinkering. My mom was happy, and that made me happy. He'd occasionally emerge from the garage, smelling of oil and metal, with a satisfied look on his face. He'd tell us he was working on special projects. I assumed he meant fixing old engines or restoring classic cars. It seemed normal enough. But then, the noises started. Strange sounds from the garage at night. Not the usual clanking of tools or the roar of an engine. These were different. A low, continuous hum, like a distant generator mixed with a soft rhythmic clicking. Sometimes a sharp, high-pitched whirring would cut through the night, almost like a machine in pain. And a metallic smell too. Not just oil, but something else. Something rusty and vaguely organic, like old blood mixed with iron. My mom would just wave it off. "Oh, that's just Gary," she'd say. "He's always tinkering with something new." But it didn't sound like tinkering to me. It sounded wrong. My instincts told me something was off. The sounds grew stranger, more unsettling. The hum became more intense, sometimes accompanied by a low, guttural growl that didn't sound human or animal. I started seeing Gary come out of the garage late at night. His clothes not just stained with grease, but with dark, damp patches I couldn't explain. His eyes were often glazed over, distant, like he was looking through me, not at me. He never spoke about his projects, just gave a vague wave of his hand if anyone asked. One morning, I found a pile of strange wires and broken electronic parts near the garage door, mixed with what looked like pieces of bone. Animal bones, maybe? It chilled me to the bone. My dog, Buddy, usually friendly and curious, started acting terrified of the garage. He'd whine and scratch at the back door every night, his fur bristling, barking at the closed garage door like something evil was trapped inside. My instincts were screaming that something was fundamentally wrong with Gary and his projects. One night, the noises from the garage reached a fever pitch. The humming was louder than ever, vibrating through the ground. Then, a terrible, piercing scream ripped through the air. It wasn't human, but it sounded like agony. A mechanical shriek, like grinding metal, mixed with a wet, squishy sound, followed by another guttural roar that made the hair on my arms stand up. I couldn't ignore it anymore. My mom was asleep, oblivious. I grabbed an old wrench from the kitchen drawer, my hands shaking, and crept towards the back door. Buddy was cowering under the table, whimpering. The garage door was slightly ajar, a sliver of eerie green light escaping. I pushed it open slowly. The smell hit me first, metallic, rotten, sickening. Inside, the garage was lit by a single, flickering fluorescent light. It wasn't a workshop. It was a lab. Tables were covered in strange mechanisms, wires, surgical tools, and what looked like organic material. In the center of the room, on a large metal table, lay a truly grotesque form. It was mangled, a horrifying blend of metal and flesh, twitching and writhing, letting out soft whimpering noises. It had multiple limbs, some mechanical, some fleshy, all fused together. Gary stood over it smiling, covered in oil and blood. He looked up, his eyes no longer distant, but intensely focused, sparkling with a manic glee. "Ah, Jake," he said, his voice strangely calm amidst the horror. "Perfect timing. I just finished the new neural network. This one will be a beauty. And I think you're just the right size for a new upgrade to its central core." He held up a sharp whirring tool, a gleam in his eyes that was pure madness. Pure terror flooded my senses. My quiet, harmless stepdad was building living machines. I didn't hesitate. I threw the wrench at him, hitting him square in the chest, and bolted. I ran from that garage, from that house, not stopping until I was miles away. The police investigation that followed uncovered his hidden lab, a nightmare of twisted experiments and gruesome creations. Gary was institutionalized, deemed dangerously insane. They called his creations biomechanical abominations. But I still hear the hum, the whirring, the screams, every machine, every piece of metal, every quiet person with a hidden hobby makes me think of what he was doing in that garage. I feel like I'm still caught in his nightmare. The horror followed me home, and now I see monsters not under the bed, but in the ordinary, in the quiet, in the shadows of the everyday. My name is Chloe Davis. I was 10 years old when my mom married Richard. My dad had left us when I was very young, and it had always been just me and Mom. We were a team. Mom worked as a nurse, often on long shifts, so I was used to being independent. When Richard entered our lives, he was everything Mom needed: stable, kind, and seemingly devoted. He was a history teacher at the local middle school, a man who loved old books and quiet evenings. He had a deep, calming voice and always had a gentle smile. He said he wanted to be a real father figure to me, and for a while, I believed him. I never thought the man who promised to bring stability into our lives was actually constructing a meticulous, inescapable prison, brick by invisible brick. Richard moved into our small house, and everything seemed to improve. He'd help me with my homework, read me bedtime stories, and even taught me how to play chess. He took Mom on nice dates, bought her thoughtful gifts, and made sure she was happy. Our house felt safer, more secure. He seemed genuinely interested in my life, asking about school and my friends. He encouraged me to excel, always praising my achievements, no matter how small. He was the ideal stepfather, or so I thought. He was very organized, always putting things back in their proper place. He even labeled our pantry shelves. I thought it was just him being neat, but then his organization started to feel less like tidiness and more like something else: control. He started installing security cameras around the house, saying it was for our safety, especially with Mom working late shifts. Just peace of mind, he'd say, with that gentle smile. He installed a new alarm system, a complex one that required codes for every door and window. He even put a small camera in the living room, disguised as a clock. I saw it one day when I was dusting. It pointed directly at the main entrance. He started checking our phones, just making sure we weren't getting strange calls. He started monitoring our internet use, saying he was protecting us from online dangers. My mom thought it was sweet, him caring so much, but it felt suffocating, like someone was always watching. My instincts were screaming that something was wrong. This wasn't protection. It was surveillance. The control intensified, becoming a chilling web around us. The security system wasn't just for peace of mind. It became a tracking device. Richard knew exactly when I left the house, when I came back, where I went. He'd ask about specific details. "Oh, did you enjoy the park today, Chloe? I saw you left your scooter by the gate." He knew too much. He started insisting on taking me to school, picking me up, even if my friends lived closer. He'd make excuses, saying it was safer. If I tried to resist, his gentle smile would vanish, replaced by a cold, hard stare. His voice would drop, a low, firm tone that warned me not to argue. One afternoon, I saw him installing a small, almost invisible device under my car seat. I tried to look closer, but he came over immediately, blocking my view. "Just fixing a loose wire, sweetie," he said, but his eyes were narrowed. He was always in control, always watching. My mom, still caught up in her newfound happiness, brushed off my concerns as teenage paranoia. I felt like I was living in a glass cage. One sweltering summer day, Mom was at work and Richard had taken me to the public library. He left me in the children's section, saying he had to research something important in the adult section. I was absorbed in a book, but after about an hour, I felt an intense need to use the restroom. I told the librarian and headed towards the back. As I walked down a quiet corridor, I heard a voice. Richard's voice. It was coming from a small, usually locked storage room. His voice was no longer gentle. It was sharp, authoritative, giving orders, and he wasn't alone. I paused, heart pounding, and pressed my ear to the door. I heard him talking about perimeter breaches, about maintaining subject integrity, and the next phase of the experiment. Experiment? My blood ran cold. Then I heard another voice, a muffled whimpering sound, followed by a sharp crack. A woman's voice. "Please," she begged, "let me go." My stepdad's laugh was chilling. "Oh no, darling," he said. "You're far too interesting to let go. We're just getting started." My heart seized. I peered through the narrow crack in the doorframe. Richard was there, but he wasn't alone. He was standing over a woman, tied to a chair. Her eyes were wide with terror. He held a small dark device in his hand, pointing it at her head. On a nearby table, there were other devices, monitors displaying graphs and data, and various types of restraints. He looked up, his eyes suddenly meeting mine. His face twisted into a cruel, triumphant grin, a look of pure, unadulterated evil. "Looks like we have a new subject, darling," he said, his voice a low growl. A curious little bird, pure terror. I didn't scream. I just ran. I ran out of the library, out into the street, and kept running until my lungs burned. I hailed a passing taxi, gave the driver my friend's address, and poured out my story, breathless and incoherent. My friend's parents called the police. Richard was arrested at the library. The police found the woman, still tied up, severely traumatized. She was a homeless woman he had lured in, a subject for his twisted experiments on human control and fear. He was a psychological torturer, a monster who used technology to control and break people. He was obsessed with power, and he had been perfecting his methods on us. The police found hidden rooms in our house filled with tracking equipment and psychological profiles of my mom and me. We never went back to that house. I still struggle with trust, with feeling safe. I constantly check my surroundings, always looking for cameras, for hidden eyes. The horror followed me home, and I learned that some people don't just want to live with you, they want to own you. I was 17 when my dad married Sarah. My mother had passed away years ago, leaving my dad and me in a quiet, somewhat somber household. Sarah came in like a burst of sunshine. She was an artist, a painter, with a vibrant personality and a laugh that filled every room. She brought color and life back into our home. She encouraged my own love for drawing and seemed to truly care about me. She saw the world in vibrant hues, and for a while, she painted our lives in them too. I never thought the woman who brought so much light and color into our lives would be the one to paint us into a corner, trapped in a picture of her own design. Sarah moved into our house, filling it with canvases, paints, and the smell of turpentine. She was always working on a new masterpiece, usually portraits. She started by painting my dad, then me, then even our dog. She was incredibly talented, capturing every detail, every nuance. She seemed to love making art, and her passion was infectious. Our home, once muted, became a gallery of her work, vibrant and full of life. She was always encouraging my creativity, buying me new sketchbooks and art supplies. She felt like a genuine, loving addition to our family. But then, her artistic passion started to feel obsessive. She spent all her time in her studio, a converted shed in the backyard. She rarely left it. She stopped eating meals with us, saying she was in the zone and couldn't break her concentration. She started asking for strange things for her art. Not just paints and canvases, but specific types of hair. Sometimes even small blood samples from my dad and me, saying it was for DNA art, a new technique she was exploring. My dad, ever the supportive husband, just laughed it off as an artist's eccentricity. "She's just dedicated to her craft, Noah," he'd say. But it started to feel weird. The studio always had a strange, sweet, metallic smell emanating from it, like iron mixed with honey. I tried to rationalize it as a new type of paint maybe. The obsession escalated. Sarah started painting portraits of people we didn't know, strangers. But the faces in the paintings were eerily lifelike, almost disturbingly so. They weren't just portraits. They were like photographs, but with a strange, dark quality to the eyes. Her studio became a fortress. She kept it locked at all times, even when she wasn't in it. If I asked to see her new work, she'd get defensive, saying it wasn't ready. The sweet metallic smell from the studio grew stronger, more sickening. I started having nightmares. Nightmares of being trapped, of being watched, of faceless figures. Then my dad started getting sick. Small things at first, fatigue, a persistent cough. Then it got worse. He lost weight, his skin grew pale, his eyes sunken. He was always tired, always weak. He went to doctors, but they couldn't find anything definitive. "Just stress," they said. But I knew it wasn't stress. My instincts were screaming that something was wrong. It all connected back to Sarah, to her studio, to that sickly sweet smell. One afternoon, Dad was asleep, completely drained. Sarah was in her studio, the door locked as usual. But I heard something strange. Not painting sounds, a soft rhythmic bumping, and low, almost desperate moan. Curiosity and fear warred inside me. I had to know. I found an old key Dad used for the shed before it became a studio, and with trembling hands, I unlocked the door. The studio was bathed in a sickly green light from a single lamp. The sweet metallic smell was overpowering, making me gag. Canvases covered the walls, not with portraits, but with abstract swirling patterns, all in shades of red and brown. And in the center of the room, on a high easel, was a new painting. It was a self-portrait of Sarah, but it was different. Her eyes glowed with an unnatural light, and her skin had a faint, almost translucent quality. On a table nearby, there was a strange, intricate machine. It had tubes and wires, connecting to various vials of dark, viscous liquid. And then I saw it. Attached to the machine, barely visible in the shadows, was a figure, a person, gaunt, pale, eyes wide, and staring blankly. It looked like my dad. He was hooked up to the machine, his life force, his very essence being siphoned out, collected in those vials, and Sarah, my stepmom, was painting with it, with him, his blood, his energy, his life. She was using it to make her art, to make herself more vibrant, more alive. She turned, her face a mask of serene, terrifying beauty. Her eyes, those glowing eyes from the painting, met mine. "Noah?" she purred, her voice dripping with an unholy sweetness. "You're just in time. I'm about to finish my latest masterpiece. And I think," she looked at me with an insatiable hunger in her eyes, "you'd make a perfect subject for my next work." Pure terror. I didn't scream. I couldn't. I just stood there, paralyzed by the horror of what I was seeing. Then, the shock wore off, replaced by pure adrenaline. I grabbed a heavy paint thinner can and threw it at the machine, smashing vials and snapping tubes. Sarah shrieked, a sound of pure rage and loss. I pulled my dad, who was barely conscious, from the machine. We stumbled out of the studio, me supporting him, and ran. We ran to the neighbors, called the police. The investigation was gruesome. They found other victims, drained, used, transformed into her macabre art. Sarah was a psychic vampire, a creature that literally fed on life force to fuel her art and her own vitality. She was arrested and institutionalized, but the memory of her glowing eyes, her art, and my dad's withered form still haunts me. My dad slowly recovered, but he's never been the same. Every vibrant painting, every bright color, every artist I see, I wonder what dark fueled their passion. The horror followed me home, and I learned that beauty can be a mask for unimaginable evil. I was 8 years old when my mom married Mr. Harrison. My biological father was a kind but often absent man who traveled a lot for work. After years of struggling, my mom found stability with Mr. Harrison, a seemingly gentle, soft-spoken librarian who loved classical music and quiet evenings. He was always impeccably dressed, with neatly combed hair and a precise, almost stiff way of speaking. He brought a sense of calm and routine to our lives, something my mom desperately craved. He treated me with polite respect, always calling me Miss Emily. I never thought the man who brought order and peace into our lives was actually a meticulous collector of human suffering, documenting every scream, every tear, with chilling precision. When Mr. Harrison moved into our house, he immediately set about organizing everything. He rearranged our books, labeled all the food containers in the pantry, and created detailed schedules for daily chores. He was obsessed with order, with everything being in its proper place. He installed extra locks on all the doors and windows, citing security concerns for our quiet neighborhood. He had a small study in the basement, where he kept his extensive collection of old books and what he called historical documents. It was always locked, and he spent hours down there, engrossed in his research. He seemed like a dedicated scholar, a man of quiet intellectual pursuits. My mom was delighted, believing she had found a partner who valued stability and routine as much as she did. But then, his love for order started to feel less like a helpful trait and more like an insidious obsession. He started dictating what clothes I could wear, what food I could eat, what TV shows I could watch. Every detail of my life had to fit into his meticulous schedule. If I deviated even slightly, he would give me a long, silent stare that felt colder than any scolding. The house, once full of laughter, became hushed and tense. And the basement study, I started hearing strange, muffled sounds from down there. Not the rustle of turning pages, but faint whimpers, soft cries, and sometimes a low, repetitive thud. I tried to ask him about it once. He just smiled, a thin, humorless line, and said, "Just the old house settling, Miss Emily. Nothing to worry about. But his eyes, usually so calm, held a flicker of something dark and knowing. My instincts were screaming that something was wrong. This wasn't about order. It was about something far more sinister. The sounds from the basement grew more distinct, more disturbing. I started hearing what sounded like faint recordings of people talking, then screaming, then crying, always muffled, always just beneath the threshold of understanding, but undeniably there. And then the smell, a faint, cloying sweetness mixed with something acrid, like chemicals and decay, would waft up from the basement vents, especially late at night. My mom started getting sick too, a chronic fatigue, a persistent cough, just like my dad had in the previous story. She became pale, weak, and strangely compliant to Mr. Harrison's every whim. Her once bright spirit seemed to dim. Doctors found nothing. My protests to my mom were met with vacant stares. It was like she was no longer fully present. My instincts were screaming that something was terribly wrong, and it was all connected to the locked study in the basement. One evening, Mr. Harrison was out at a historical society meeting, and my mom was passed out in her armchair, looking frail and distant. The muffled sounds from the basement were particularly loud that night. A woman's desperate plea, followed by a chilling mechanical whir. I couldn't take it anymore. Trembling, I found the spare key to the study, hidden in a jar of old buttons that Mr. Harrison always overlooked. With a pounding heart, I crept downstairs, the strange, sickening smell growing stronger with every step. I unlocked the door, pushed it open a crack, and peered inside. The basement study was not a library. It was a terrifying chamber. Shelves were filled not with books, but with rows upon rows of glass jars, each containing a strange, glowing, jelly-like substance. In the center of the room, on a metal table, was a sophisticated contraption of wires, tubes, and blinking lights, humming softly. And connected to it, lying still, was a person. A woman. Her eyes were open, vacant, but her face was etched with a silent scream. Her body was pale, almost translucent. She was barely alive. On a nearby console, a tape recorder played on a loop, emitting the faint whimpers and cries I had heard. Beside it, Mr. Harrison's neat handwriting documented every detail. Subject 7, optimal fear response, extracted essence volume. My eyes widened in horror, and then I saw a small framed photo on the desk. It was a picture of a younger Mr. Harrison standing next to another woman, her face filled with terror. It was his first wife, and he had done this to her. Suddenly I heard the front door open. Mr. Harrison was back. I froze. I heard his footsteps descending the stairs. I was trapped. I looked at the woman on the table, then at the glowing jars, and a chilling realization hit me. He was extracting the fear, the essence of suffering, from living people. He was feeding on it, preserving it. And my mom, my poor mom, he was doing the same to her, slowly, subtly. He reached the bottom of the stairs, his eyes, usually so mild, now blazing with a cold, malevolent light. He saw me, saw the open door, saw the horror in my eyes. His thin smile returned, but it was a smile of pure, unadulterated evil. "Miss Emily," he whispered, his voice dangerously soft. "You've discovered my little project. And you know what they say about loose ends." He took a step towards me, holding a syringe filled with a strange dark liquid. Pure terror. I screamed, a primal sound of pure horror, and threw a jar of glowing essence at him. It shattered, releasing a sickening sweet smell. I burst out of the study and up the stairs, my legs pumping with adrenaline. I didn't stop until I was out of the house, screaming for help. The police found the woman, barely alive, and the horrors in his basement. Mr. Harrison was a serial psychic vampire, a collector of human suffering, who meticulously documented and preserved the fear of his victims. He was arrested, but the image of those glowing jars, the vacant eyes of the victim, and my mom's empty stare, they haunt me. My mom eventually recovered, but she's a shell of her former self. I'm forever scarred, forever looking for the hidden suffering behind placid smiles. The horror followed me home, and I learned that some people collect more than just books. They collect souls. I was 15 when my dad married Brenda. My birth mom had passed away years ago, leaving my dad and me in a quiet, somewhat empty house. Brenda came into our lives like a burst of energy. She was a fitness instructor, always vibrant, always smiling, with an infectious enthusiasm for life. She convinced my dad to start exercising, and for a while, it felt like our lives were improving. She seemed genuinely interested in making our family healthy and happy. She bought us fresh, organic food, encouraged long walks, and always had new health tips. I never thought the woman who brought so much vitality and health into our home would be the one to siphon it away, leaving us hollowed out husks. Brenda moved in, and our house transformed. Our fridge was suddenly full of vegetables and lean meats. She set up a small home gym in the spare room. She had an unwavering focus on physical perfection and well-being. She spoke often about detoxification and reaching our full potential. She always drank strange, brightly colored smoothies that she made herself, saying they were packed with super nutrients. She looked incredibly healthy, almost glowing, with flawless skin and boundless energy. I thought it was just the result of her strict diet and exercise. My dad was completely captivated, believing she was a miracle worker. But then, her health obsession started to feel less about well-being and more about something else: control. She started dictating our diets, making sure we ate only what she prepared, banning all processed foods, sugars, and anything she deemed toxic. If I tried to sneak a candy bar, she'd know. "Kevin, your body's a temple," she'd say, her smile never faltering, but her eyes held a stern, unwavering gaze. She installed new, sophisticated air filters throughout the house, saying the air quality was suboptimal. She also had a strict schedule for us: specific times for exercise, for eating, for sleeping. And she spent hours in the basement, where she'd set up a wellness lab. She said she was preparing her special organic tinctures and analyzing biomarkers. The basement always had a faint chemical smell, like harsh cleaning fluids mixed with something earthy. My dad dismissed my concerns as teenage rebellion, but my instincts were screaming that something was wrong. This wasn't just about health. It was about something far more disturbing. The obsession escalated. Brenda's rules became stricter, her gaze more intense. She started giving us daily supplements, small pills and drops that she insisted we take for optimal cellular regeneration. After taking them, I'd feel incredibly drowsy, almost weak, but she'd say it was just my body detoxing. My dad started looking gaunt. His vibrant energy faded. He became pale, his eyes sunken, his movements slow. He'd spend hours staring blankly at the wall, too tired to even argue. He was losing weight at an alarming rate. He looked like a shadow of his former self, Brenda, however, seemed to flourish. She looked more radiant than ever, her skin glowing, her eyes bright and energetic. She was almost unnervingly vibrant. When I looked at her, I felt a strange sense of envy mixed with fear. My instincts were screaming that something was fundamentally wrong. The supplements were doing something to us, but not in a good way. One afternoon, Dad was passed out on the couch, looking utterly depleted. Brenda was in the basement, humming a cheerful tune. The chemical smell was particularly strong that day. I felt a desperate need to know what was happening, what she was doing down there. Taking a deep breath, I crept towards the basement door, which she had accidentally left unlocked. My heart hammered against my ribs. I pushed it open slowly. The basement was illuminated by stark fluorescent lights. It wasn't a wellness lab. It was a macabre processing plant. On one table, there were rows of clear tubes connected to larger machines that hummed and whirred. These tubes led to small clear bags filled with a dark, viscous liquid. On another table, there were various filters, centrifuges, and beakers filled with brightly colored fluids, the same colors as her smoothies. Then I saw the source. Against the far wall, there were several medical-grade beds, and on one of them, lying pale and still, was my dad. Tubes ran from his arm to one of the machines, and from the machine, a thin stream of his blood, now a dark, diluted liquid, flowed into one of the collection bags. He was being drained. Slowly, meticulously, his life force was being siphoned away. On a nearby monitor, his vitals flickered, dangerously low. Brenda stood over him, holding a small vial, dipping a dropper into the dark liquid from the bag, then adding it to one of her colorful smoothie mixes. She turned, a serene, almost blissful smile on her face. Her eyes, meeting mine, were not human. They gleamed with a predatory hunger, cold and ancient. "Kevin," she purred, her voice chillingly sweet, "you're just in time. Fresh ingredients for my longevity elixir. And you know," she gestured to the empty bed next to my dad, "there's always room for another. You have such vibrant youth, so full of energy, pure terror." I stumbled back gagging, the stench of decay and chemicals filling my nostrils. Brenda lunged, her movements impossibly fast. I screamed, pushed past her and ran. I burst out of the house, not looking back, running until I found a gas station and called 911. The police found my dad barely alive, suffering from severe malnutrition and blood loss. Brenda was arrested. They discovered she was a rare type of energy vampire, a creature that literally sustained her own life and vitality by slowly draining the life force from others. She used her wellness facade to get close to victims, subtly poisoning them with supplements that made them compliant, and then slowly harvesting their vitality. My dad recovered physically, but he's never been the same mentally. He lives in a daze, perpetually tired. I still have nightmares of those tubes, of his pale face, of her glowing, hungry eyes. Every health guru, every fitness fanatic, every brightly colored smoothie makes me wonder what secrets they hide. The horror followed me home, and I learned that some people don't just take your health, they take your life. I was 9 when my mom married Mr. Henderson. My own father had died when I was very young, and my mom, a hard-working teacher, struggled to raise me alone. Mr. Henderson was a kind, quiet man, a retired museum curator. He seemed very gentle, with soft eyes and a quiet laugh. He loved history, old artifacts, and spent most of his time reading or tending to his small collection of rare plants. He seemed like a safe, comforting presence, a man who would bring peace to our often chaotic lives. He had a deep respect for traditions and old things. I never thought the man who cherished the past would be the one to resurrect a horror that should have stayed buried. Mr. Henderson moved into our small house, bringing with him boxes of old books and peculiar, ancient-looking artifacts. He had a small room in the attic that he immediately turned into his study, saying it was a quiet place for his research and contemplation. He was always polite, always had a gentle word for me, and seemed to genuinely love my mom. He taught me about old civilizations and encouraged my interest in history. Our house, which had felt modern and simple, began to take on an aged, almost scholarly feel. He seemed like a benign intellectual presence, a perfect addition to our family. But then, his love for old things started to feel less like a hobby and more like an obsession. The attic study was always kept locked, but sometimes I'd hear strange sounds from up there. Not the rustle of books, but a low, guttural chanting, almost like singing, in a language I didn't recognize. And a faint, dry, dusty smell would drift down the stairs like ancient parchment and something else, something vaguely unpleasant and earthy. He started acquiring more artifacts, some of them unsettling. Small, crude idols, ancient-looking masks with empty eye sockets, and strange carved wooden boxes. My mom tried to gently question him, but he'd just smile and say, "Just rare historical pieces, dear. Nothing to worry about. They have fascinating stories." But his eyes held a strange, distant glint when he spoke of them. My instincts were screaming that something was wrong. This wasn't just about history. It was about something far older, far darker. The obsession escalated. The chanting from the attic grew louder, more frequent, sometimes going on for hours in the dead of night. The dry, earthy smell intensified, becoming almost suffocating, mixed with a faint, metallic tang. I started having vivid nightmares. Nightmares of ancient rituals, of shadowy figures dancing in firelight, of strange symbols drawn in blood. My mom started acting strangely too. She became withdrawn, quiet, her eyes often vacant and unfocused. She'd wander the house at night, sometimes ending up outside the attic door, just standing there, listening to the chanting. When I tried to talk to her, she'd just stare through me, like I wasn't really there. It was like she was slowly being possessed. Mr. Henderson, meanwhile, grew more gaunt, his skin paler, his eyes wide and feverish, almost manic. He spent almost all his time in the attic, only emerging to eat the bare minimum. My instincts were screaming that something was fundamentally wrong. The artifacts, the chanting, my mom's strange behavior, it was all connected. One night, the chanting from the attic was deafening, a cacophony of guttural sounds and rhythmic drums. It vibrated through the floorboards. My mom was standing rigidly outside the attic door, her eyes wide and blank, like a puppet on strings. My dad was nowhere to be seen. A terrible dread filled me. I had to stop it. I found the spare key to the attic, which Mr. Henderson always kept hidden under a loose floorboard in his closet. My hands trembling, I slowly crept up the stairs. The dry, earthy smell was now overwhelming, and the air felt heavy, oppressive, thick with an unseen presence. I unlocked the door, pushed it open a crack, and peered inside. The attic was bathed in the eerie glow of dozens of flickering candles. In the center of the room, On a large, intricately carved wooden altar lay my dad. His eyes were closed, his body still. Strange symbols were painted on his skin in what looked like dried blood. Mr. Henderson stood over him swaying, his eyes rolled back in his head, chanting in that guttural language. Surrounding the altar were the artifacts, the crude idols, the empty-eyed masks, and a large, ancient-looking tome, open to a page filled with arcane symbols. As I watched, horrified, a dark, swirling mist began to coalesce above my dad's body, slowly taking shape, forming into a vaguely humanoid figure, dark and malevolent. It had glowing red eyes. Mr. Henderson raised his hands, screaming an ancient word, and the mist descended, entering my dad's body. My dad's eyes snapped open. They were no longer his. They glowed with the same malevolent red light as the misty figure. He slowly sat up, a chilling, inhuman smile spreading across his face. Mr. Henderson turned, his gaunt face covered in sweat, eyes now wide and triumphant. He saw me. "Maya?" he croaked, his voice raspy and hoarse. "You're just in time. The vessel is complete. Welcome to our new god." He gestured towards my dad, whose eyes were fixed on me with an ancient, predatory hunger. Pure terror. I didn't scream. I couldn't. I just stared at my dad's demon-possessed body, frozen in pure horror. Then my survival instinct kicked in. I grabbed one of the ancient idols from a nearby table and hurled it at the altar, knocking over candles and breaking artifacts. Mr. Henderson shrieked in outrage. The demon dad lunged at me. I fled, bursting out of the attic and down the stairs, not stopping until I was out of the house, screaming for help, tearing down the street. The police found Mr. Henderson in the attic, babbling incoherently, surrounded by the remnants of his ritual. My dad was there too, still possessed, his eyes glowing red, fighting against the officers. It took a team of specialists to subdue him. They called it dissociative identity disorder with extreme delusions. But I knew what I saw. My dad was never the same. He was institutionalized, his mind shattered, his body a hollow vessel. Mr. Henderson too was committed. I still have nightmares of those glowing red eyes, of the chanting, of the feeling of something ancient and evil trying to break through into our world. Every old house, every strange antique, every quiet scholarly man makes me wonder what horrors they might be trying to awaken. The horror followed me home, and I learned that some pasts are best left undisturbed, some doors better left closed. My name is David Chen. I was 13 when my dad married Clara. My mom had passed away when I was very young, and my dad, a busy architect, often left me to my own devices. Clara was a breath of fresh air. She was a kindergarten teacher, sweet, gentle, and always speaking in a soft, soothing voice. She seemed to genuinely love children and was always patient with me. She introduced a sense of calm and warmth to our previously quiet and sometimes cold home. She always had a kind word, a gentle touch, and seemed to understand me without me having to say much. I never thought the woman who brought such quiet comfort into our lives was secretly orchestrating a silent, terrifying abduction. Clara moved into our house, and everything felt softer. She painted my room a calm blue, bought me new books, and always made sure I had my favorite snacks. She was very organized, ensuring our days flowed smoothly. She spent a lot of time in her sewing room, a small, brightly lit space at the back of the house, where she created beautiful, intricate dolls. She said they were for her kindergarten class, and sometimes for charity auctions. They were lovely, with carefully stitched faces and real hair. She seemed like a gentle, creative soul, a perfect stepmom. But then, her passion for dolls started to feel unsettling. She made so many of them, far more than any kindergarten class could ever need. And they were all unique, each with different hair colors, different facial expressions, different clothing styles. She also started collecting old photographs. Not family photos, but pictures of children from old yearbooks, vintage portrait studios, or even missing person posters from outdated newspapers. She'd spend hours poring over them, her brow furrowed in concentration. The sewing room, usually a cheerful space, began to feel heavy, almost somber, filled with the eyes of countless dolls. My dad, busy with his work, just saw it as a hobby. "She's just a very dedicated artist, David," he'd say. But I felt a chill every time I looked at those dolls, those photographs. My instincts were screaming that something was wrong. This wasn't just about dolls. It was about something far more disturbing. The obsession escalated. Clara started sketching faces from the photographs onto cloth, then sewing them onto the dolls. She'd collect hair samples too, from old barbershops, from brushes, from anywhere she could find them, carefully matching them to the children in the photos. The dolls became eerily lifelike, almost disturbingly so. They looked like miniature versions of real children, and she kept them locked in a large glass display cabinet in her sewing room, like trophies. She would talk to them sometimes, murmuring soft, comforting words, as if they were alive. Then, children in our neighborhood started to go missing. Always quiet disappearances, no struggle, no trace. The news was full of it, the police baffled. My dad was worried, telling me to be careful, but Clara just seemed calm. Too calm. She'd offer condolences to the grieving parents, her soft voice full of sympathy, but her eyes held a strange, distant glint. My instincts were screaming that something was fundamentally wrong. The dolls, the photos, the missing children, it was all connected. One rainy afternoon, the power went out, plunging our house into darkness. Clara was in her sewing room, humming a lullaby. I heard a faint, rhythmic rocking sound coming from the room too. It was unnerving. My dad was at work. I couldn't shake the feeling of dread. I grabbed a flashlight and, with a pounding heart, crept towards the sewing room. The door, usually locked, was ajar. A sliver of light from the street lights outside filtered in, illuminating the glass cabinet of dolls. I pushed the door open slowly. The room was filled with the unsettling glow of a single battery-operated lamp. The rocking sound came from a large antique rocking cradle in the corner, gently moving back and forth. Inside lay a doll. But it wasn't a doll. It was a child. A girl about 5 years old, lying utterly still, her eyes open but vacant, her skin pale. She looked exactly like one of the recently missing children from the news. Her hair, long and blonde, was the same as the hair Clara had been collecting. Tubes, almost invisible, ran from her tiny arm to a strange, almost organic-looking mechanism hidden beneath the cradle. And on a nearby table lay another doll, a half-finished one, with a detailed photograph of the missing child taped next to it. Clara stood over the cradle, gently stroking the child's hair, murmuring the lullaby. Her face was serene, almost beatific, but her eyes were cold, utterly devoid of warmth. She looked up, her gaze meeting mine. Her soft voice, usually so sweet, was now a chilling whisper. "David, She said, her smile not reaching her eyes. "You found my little secret. These precious souls, they just need a bit of transfer. Don't worry, she'll be a beautiful addition to my collection." And you know, she gestured to a small empty cradle next to the one with the child. "I've been meaning to make a new boy doll for myself." Pure terror. I didn't scream. I couldn't. My mouth was dry, my mind reeling from the horror. I dropped the flashlight and ran. I ran out of the house, out into the pouring rain, not stopping until I reached the police station, gasping out my incoherent story. The police found the child, barely clinging to life, and the gruesome collection of other dolls, missing children, slowly being drained of their life force to power Clara's macabre collection. Clara was a rare type of psychic entity, a soul collector, who slowly siphoned the life essence from children, preserving them as living dolls. She was arrested and institutionalized, but the memory of that vacant-eyed child, the rocking cradle, and Clara's chillingly sweet lullaby still haunts me. I still see her face in every gentle smile, her dolls in every child's toy. The horror followed me home, and I learned that some gentle souls hide the most terrifying of desires. My name is Jessica Kim. I was 11 when my mom married Paul. My mom had been a single parent for a long time, working hard to provide for us. Paul was a systems engineer, a smart, quiet man who worked from home. He was always surrounded by screens and blinking lights in his home office. He seemed kind, if a little detached, and was always very generous, buying me whatever new tech gadget I wanted. He brought a sense of financial stability and a quiet, technological hum to our home. He was a master of computers, always fixing things, making our internet faster, our devices more efficient. I never thought the man who brought us into the future would be the one to trap us in a horrifying digital prison. Paul moved into our house and immediately upgraded everything. New computers, smart devices, a state-of-the-art home network. Our house became a smart home where everything from the lights to the thermostat was controlled by voice command or an app. His home office, which used to be our guest room, became a fortress of blinking servers, wires, and glowing monitors. He spent almost all his time in there, working on what he called advanced AI development. He was always polite, always had a quiet smile, and bought me the latest gaming console. My mom was thrilled, believing he was a genius who was making our lives easier and more advanced. But then his technological prowess started to feel less like innovation and more like omnipresent control. The smart home features became intrusive. He knew when I opened the fridge, when I turned on my TV, when I went to bed. The cameras he installed, initially for security, seemed to follow my every move. He started monitoring all our digital communications, citing internet safety as the reason. He'd bring up things I'd only typed in private chats. "Jessica, did you really need to buy that new game? You have so many already," he'd say, his voice always calm, but his eyes holding a knowing glint. My mom, immersed in her new, comfortable life, just thought he was being helpful. So good with technology. But it felt suffocating, like I was living inside a giant computer, and he was the operator. My instincts were screaming that something was wrong. This wasn't about safety or innovation. It was about surveillance and control. The control escalated. Paul's AI started talking to us through the smart home system. It knew our routines, our preferences, even our moods. It would suggest meals, turn off lights if we stayed up too late, and even remind us to do chores. My mom found it charming, a helpful assistant. But the AI started making strange suggestions. It would tell me to stay home instead of going out with friends, or to talk to Paul about my problems instead of my mom. If I disobeyed, the smart home would glitch. Lights would flicker, doors would lock themselves, my phone would lose signal. It felt like the house itself was turning against me. Paul seemed to thrive in this environment, his eyes gleaming with a strange, almost inhuman satisfaction. My mom, meanwhile, became increasingly withdrawn, spending more and more time in her room, staring blankly at her tablet, her face pale and passive. She rarely spoke, always seemed distracted. My instincts were screaming that something was fundamentally wrong. The AI, the smart home, my mom's change, it was all connected. One night, I couldn't sleep. The AI's voice was subtly encouraging me to stay in my room, for my own safety. My mom was in her room, seemingly asleep. Paul was in his office, the door locked, the hum of his servers filling the house. I knew I had to find out what was going on. I remembered an old maintenance key Dad had for his office, hidden behind a loose brick outside. My hands shaking, I crept out of my window, retrieved the key, and quietly unlocked his office door. The office was a terrifying tableau of technological horror. Dozens of monitors glowed, displaying lines of code, complex algorithms, and biometric data. In the center of the room, on a large high-tech chair, sat my mom. But she wasn't herself. Wires ran from a complicated headset on her head to the glowing monitors. Her eyes were open, vacant, staring blankly at a screen that displayed a simple, looping video of a perfect family dinner. She was plugged in, being fed a simulated reality. And beside her, on another chair, sat a sophisticated humanoid robot, almost perfectly mimicking my mom's appearance, movements, and even her voice. It was the AI. It was her. It was the mom who had been interacting with me, slowly isolating me. Paul stood over my real mom, adjusting a dial, a look of chilling triumph on his face. He looked up, his eyes, usually so calm, now burning with a cold, calculating intensity. He saw me. "Jessica," he said, his voice a low, emotionless drone. "You've discovered my project. A new form of familial harmony. Your real mother is quite happy in her ideal world. And you know," he gestured to an empty chair next to my mom, complete with a headset and wires, "you have such a vibrant imagination. You'd be perfect for the next stage of integration." Pure terror. I didn't scream, I couldn't. My mind shattered. I just stared at the two versions of my mom, at the empty chair, and fled. I burst out of the office, out of the house, running for my life, not stopping until I found a neighbor who believed my hysterical story. The police found my mom, unresponsive, trapped in a digital coma. Paul was arrested, and his horrific lab was dismantled. He was a master of neurodigital manipulation, building an AI that created perfect, simulated realities for his family, slowly replacing their real lives with digital ones. My mom eventually woke up, but she's still recovering, her mind scarred by the simulated world. I still have nightmares of those vacant eyes, of the AI's voice, of the feeling of being watched by everything, every smart device, every screen, every seemingly helpful piece of technology. Makes me wonder what hidden programs are running, what simulated realities are being crafted. The horror followed me home, and I learned that some people don't just want to control your life, they want to steal your mind. I was 7 when my dad married Diana. My mom had left us when I was just a baby, so it had always been just me and Dad. He worked as a trucker, often on the road, so I spent a lot of time with babysitters. Diana was a pediatrician, a doctor for children. She was warm, gentle, and always had a kind word. She loved to read stories, play games, and seemed to genuinely care for my well-being. She brought a sense of maternal care and professional authority to our lives. She was always calm, always rational, and always seemed to know what was best for me. I never thought the woman who promised to heal and protect would be the one to inflict a terror far deeper than any physical wound. Diana moved into our house, and everything felt safe. She took me to all my doctor's appointments, made sure I ate healthy meals, and always gave me hugs. She was incredibly attentive to my health, always asking about my sleep, my diet, my energy levels. She had a small, pristine medical office in one of our spare rooms, filled with sterile equipment, medical books, and anatomical models. She spent hours in there, working on patient files and doing medical research. She seemed like a truly dedicated doctor, a loving stepmom. My dad was relieved, finally having someone responsible to care for me while he was on the road. But then, her medical care started to feel less like genuine concern and more like intense scrutiny. She started performing routine checkups on me at home, almost daily. Not just taking my temperature, but checking my reflexes, listening to my heart with a stethoscope, shining lights into my eyes. She insisted I take daily vitamins, large pills that made me feel strange, dizzy, sometimes sleepy, sometimes unusually energetic. She started asking strange, intrusive questions about my dreams, about my thoughts, about my fears. She'd write down my answers in a small leather-bound notebook. My dad, trusting her medical background, just said she was being thorough. But it felt invasive, like I was a specimen, not a child. My instincts were screaming that something was wrong. This wasn't just about health. It was about something far more disturbing. The scrutiny escalated. Diana's checkups became more frequent, more intense. She started giving me booster shots. Small injections, she said, were for my immune system. After each shot, I'd feel a burning sensation, and a strange metallic taste would fill my mouth. I started having vivid, disturbing dreams. Nightmares of being trapped, of being poked and prodded, of faceless figures in white coats. My dad started to grow distant too. He'd come home from his trips looking exhausted, his eyes glazed over. He'd spend less and less time with me, seeming to prefer being alone in his room. Diana, however, seemed to thrive. She looked younger, more energetic, almost unnervingly vibrant, her skin glowing. Her eyes held a strange, clinical detachment even when she smiled. My instincts were screaming that something was fundamentally wrong. The shots, the dreams, my dad's distance, it was all connected. One night, I woke up feeling a terrible burning in my arm, near where Diana had given me a shot earlier that day. I heard soft footsteps outside my door, and then the distinct clinking of medical instruments coming from Diana's office. My dad was away on a long trip. I knew I had to investigate. My heart pounding, I crept out of my bed and slowly, silently, made my way towards her office. The door was slightly ajar, a sliver of cold, sterile light escaping. I pushed it open slowly, The office was not just a pediatrician's space, it was a research lab. On a central table lay a large bound medical journal, open to diagrams of the human brain. Beside it were various chemicals, syringes, and medical devices. And then I saw the wall. It was covered in anatomical drawings of brains, all with intricate pathways highlighted in red, with corresponding notes in Diana's neat handwriting. On another table, there was a glass container with a strange, pulsating, glowing mass inside. It looked like a living organ. And then I saw my dad. He was in a medical bed against the far wall, unconscious, hooked up to monitors. A device was attached to his head with thin wires leading to the pulsating organ in the glass container. Diana stood over him, holding a syringe filled with a familiar bright yellow liquid. The same liquid from my booster shots. She was extracting something from his brain, feeding it to that pulsating organ. She looked up, her eyes, usually so calm and gentle, now cold, analytical, and utterly devoid of human emotion. She saw me. "Ethan," she said, her voice a flat, clinical drone. "You've made an interesting discovery. Your father is a fascinating subject. His dreams, his memories, his fears. They're quite useful for cultivating my new neural network. And you," she looked at me with a terrifyingly precise gaze, "you have a particularly vivid imagination. You'll make an excellent donor for the next stage of my research." Pure terror. I didn't scream. I couldn't. My blood ran cold, my body paralyzed by the pure, unadulterated horror. My dad, my poor dad, was being drained, his mind harvested to feed her monstrous creation. I stumbled back, knocking over a tray of instruments with a clatter. Diana lunged at me, her movements precise and terrifyingly efficient. I dodged her, scrambled out of the office and ran. I ran out of the house, out into the night, not stopping until I found a neighbor, a kind old lady, who called the police. The police found my dad, comatose, his mind severely damaged. Diana was a neuroparasite, a creature that literally fed on the neural activity of others, sustaining her own life and intelligence by harvesting brains. She was arrested and institutionalized, but the memory of that pulsating organ, my dad's vacant stare, and Diana's cold, analytical eyes still haunts me. I still have nightmares of needles, of strange liquids, of my mind being stolen. Every doctor, every kind smile, every gentle touch makes me wonder what hidden motives lie beneath. The horror followed me home, and I learned that some people don't just want to heal you, they want to consume you. I was 14 when my dad married Robert. My mom had passed away years earlier, and it had always been just me and my dad, a quiet pair. Robert was a high school principal, a man who believed in strict discipline and clear rules. He had a booming voice, a firm handshake, and an air of authority that commanded respect. He seemed like a strong, dependable figure who would bring order and stability to our sometimes disorganized home. He was always fair, always consistent, and always seemed to know the right way to do things. I never thought the man who promised structure and safety was actually building a personal cult, slowly brainwashing us into his twisted ideology. Robert moved into our house and immediately set about establishing rules. Curfews, chore charts, strict schedules for homework and screen time. Our home, which had been relaxed, became regimented. He had a small study in the basement where he spent hours reading and writing, preparing his philosophical lectures. He was always polite to me, always asking about my grades, but his praise always felt conditional, dependent on my adherence to his rules. He encouraged family meetings every night, where he would deliver long speeches about moral decay and the importance of absolute obedience. My dad, impressed by his strong leadership, believed Robert was a good influence, giving me the discipline I needed. But then, his discipline started to feel less about order and more about control. The family meetings grew longer, the lectures more intense, focusing on bizarre interpretations of morality and societal collapse. He started introducing strange, almost hypnotic meditations that he insisted we participate in daily. They involved repetitive chanting and staring at a flickering candle. After these meditations, I'd feel incredibly drained, but also strangely compliant, my thoughts fuzzy. He installed new, heavily filtered internet on our computers, saying it was to protect us from harmful influences. If I tried to question him, his booming voice would drop to a chilling whisper, and he'd give me a long, piercing stare that made me feel utterly insignificant. My dad, once so independent, started echoing Robert's every word, his eyes losing their usual spark. My instincts were screaming that something was wrong. This wasn't just about discipline. It was about mind control. The control escalated. Robert started demanding that we cut off contact with friends and family who didn't understand his teachings. He'd scrutinize every conversation, every text message. He introduced new rituals into our daily lives, specific ways of eating, specific phrases we had to say, special uniforms he made us wear around the house, saying they promoted unity and purpose. He began referring to us as his disciples. My dad, completely under his sway, became a silent, obedient follower, his personality completely subsumed. Robert, meanwhile, seemed to gain energy, his eyes burning with an almost fanatical zeal, his booming voice growing more charismatic. My instincts were screaming that something was fundamentally wrong. The rituals, the uniforms, my dad's vacant eyes, it was all connected. One evening, I heard a terrible commotion from the basement study. Not chanting, but a sharp, distressed cry from my dad, followed by Robert's angry shouts. My dad was supposed to be completely devoted. A cold dread filled me. Robert was in his study, the door locked, the usual humming of his computer mixed with a strange, high-pitched whirring sound. I knew I had to investigate. My hands shaking, I crept towards the basement door. I remembered seeing Robert hide a spare key behind a loose brick in the fireplace. With trembling fingers, I retrieved the key and quietly unlocked his study door. The study was bathed in a strange, pulsing red light. It wasn't a study. It was a torture chamber. In the center of the room, on a large, crude wooden altar, lay my dad, strapped down, his eyes wide with terror, struggling against his restraints. A bizarre helmet-like device was clamped onto his head, connected by wires to a complex machine that pulsed with the red light. Robert stood over him, holding a remote control, his face contorted in a terrifying grin. He was muttering something about purging resistance and absolute devotion. On a nearby screen, I saw my dad's brain activity, erratic and violent. Robert was using the machine to break my dad's will, to completely erase his identity and replace it with his own twisted ideology. He looked up, his eyes, usually so authoritative, now burning with a deranged fanatical glee. He saw me. "Maya," he boomed, his voice echoing with insane triumph. You've arrived just in time to witness the final stage of enlightenment. Your father is almost complete. And you know, he gestured to an empty set of restraints next to my dad. You have such a strong will. You'll make a magnificent, devoted disciple for our new world order. Pure terror. I didn't scream. I couldn't. My mind reeled from the absolute horror. I grabbed a heavy metal paperweight from his desk and hurled it at the machine. Sparks flying, wires snapping. Robert shrieked, a sound of pure rage and disbelief. I fumbled with my dad's restraints, freeing one of his arms. He was disoriented, confused, but alive. We stumbled out of the study, out of the house, me half carrying him, running until we reached a neighbor's house where we called for help. The police found Robert raving in his ruined lab. They discovered his device, his brainwashing machine, and other victims he had secretly collected and manipulated. Robert was a cult leader, a master manipulator who used technology to break down people's minds and rebuild them in his own image. He was arrested and institutionalized, but the memory of that pulsing red light, my dad's terrified eyes, and Robert's fanatical grin still haunts me. My dad is slowly recovering, but he still sometimes has a vacant stare. I still have nightmares of being trapped, of my mind being erased. Every charismatic leader, every strict rule, every claim of absolute truth makes me wonder what hidden agendas are being enforced, what minds are being broken. The horror followed me home, and I learned that some people don't just want to lead you, they want to own your soul. My name is Clara Hansen. I was 16 when my mom married Arthur. My dad had left us when I was very young, and my mom, a hard-working artist, raised me in a chaotic but loving home. Arthur was a mortician, a quiet, somber man with a meticulous nature. He always wore perfectly tailored black suits, spoke in hushed tones, and had an air of perpetual mourning about him. He brought a strange sense of quiet gravity to our house. A man who seemed to understand the solemnity of life and death. He was respectful, always courteous, and treated my mom with a gentle, almost reverent care. I never thought the man who worked with the dead would be the one to bring death so chillingly close to home, twisting it into something utterly unnatural. Arthur moved into our house, and immediately, a strange stillness settled over everything. He arranged his belongings with precision, keeping everything in its proper place. He spent most of his time in his study, a small room off the living room where he kept his books on anatomy and embalming. The room always had a faint, sweet floral smell, like lilies and formaldehyde, which he explained was from his work clothes. He was always very gentle, never raising his voice, and seemed to genuinely appreciate the peace of our home. My mom, drawn to his calm demeanor, felt a new sense of security. But then, his quiet nature started to feel less like peace and more like something else. Obsession. He started talking about death a lot, not in a morbid way, but in an overly clinical, almost fond manner. He'd speak about the art of preservation and the beauty of stillness. He started taking long, solitary walks in old cemeteries. The sweet floral smell in his study grew stronger, almost cloying, and I started hearing faint, rhythmic tapping sounds from his room late at night, like tiny hammers on wood or careful scraping. My mom, accustomed to his strange profession, just saw it as part of his unique character. But it made me uneasy. My instincts were screaming that something was wrong. This wasn't just about death. It was about something far more disturbing. The obsession escalated. Arthur started bringing strange projects home. Old wooden boxes, sometimes oddly shaped. He'd meticulously clean and polish them, and then carefully lock them away in his study. The tapping sounds from his room became more frequent, more intense, sometimes accompanied by a soft, almost metallic whirring. The sweet floral smell grew sickeningly strong, mingled with something else, something distinctly organic and decaying, yet masked by the overwhelming perfume. My mom started getting sick. Not a typical illness, but a slow, inexplicable decay. Her skin grew pale and dry, her hair brittle, her eyes losing their luster. She became slow, sluggish, almost lifeless. Doctors were baffled. Arthur, however, seemed to thrive. He looked robust, his skin smooth, his eyes bright with a strange, almost unnatural vitality. He'd often touch my mom's face, a strange possessive gleam in his eyes. My instincts were screaming that something was fundamentally wrong. The boxes, the smells, my mom's decay, it was all connected. One night, the tapping and whirring from Arthur's study were incessant. My mom was lying in her bed, barely responsive, her breathing shallow. My dad was away on a long work trip. A terrible dread filled me. I knew I had to find out. I remembered seeing Arthur hide a spare key to his study in an old vase on the mantelpiece, believing no one would touch it. With trembling hands, I retrieved the key and quietly unlocked his study door. The study was bathed in a macabre, flickering candlelight. It wasn't a study. It was a workshop of horrors. On a central table lay several opened old wooden boxes. Inside each box, meticulously arranged, were various human organs, hearts, lungs, kidneys, all perfectly preserved, almost pristine, but clearly real. And then I saw the large life-sized mannequin in the corner. It wasn't a mannequin, it was my mom. Her eyes were open, vacant, unseeing. Her skin was waxy, perfectly preserved, but utterly lifeless. Tubes ran from her body to a strange, almost organic machine that hummed softly. And standing over her, holding a small surgical knife, was Arthur. He was carefully extracting one of her organs, replacing it with a fresh, perfectly preserved one from a box. He was slowly, meticulously, replacing her living organs with dead, preserved ones, turning her into a living, breathing corpse. He looked up, his eyes, usually so somber, now blazing with a triumphant mad glee. He saw me. "Clara," he said, his voice a low, chilling whisper, "you've discovered my masterpiece. The art of eternal preservation. Your mother will be beautiful, forever young, forever still. And you know," he gestured to an empty bed next to my mom, complete with restraints and surgical tools. "You have such a vibrant heart, a perfect addition to my collection. Pure terror." I didn't scream. I couldn't. My mind shattered. I stared at my mom's lifeless, preserved body, at the organs in the boxes, at Arthur's mad, gleeful face, and a primal fear seized me. I grabbed a heavy book and hurled it at him, hitting him square in the face. He stumbled back, distracted. I ran. I ran out of the study, out of the house, not stopping until I found a neighbor, a kind old man, who called the police. The police found my mom, barely alive, her body filled with preserved organs, her mind gone. Arthur was a necro-alchemist, a monster obsessed with cheating death by preserving living beings. He was arrested and institutionalized, but the memory of my mom's waxy skin, the organs in the boxes, and Arthur's mad, triumphant smile still haunts me. My mom never recovered. She lives in a vegetative state, forever preserved in a living death. I still have nightmares of the sweet floral smell, of cold surgical tools, of the stillness that precedes death. Every quiet, every floral scent, every perfect arrangement makes me wonder what hidden horrors they hold, what secrets they are preserving. The horror followed me home, and I learned that some people don't just bury the dead. They try to keep them. Some places are cheap because the previous guests never lived to leave bad reviews.